Walking Dead. My first true tale of phantasmic terror comes to us from Reddit user Jalcott. Answering a question posed in the thread, nurses and doctors of Reddit, what's the weirdest and most paranormal thing you've ever experienced? Hospitals already seem pretty haunted as is, so it's no surprise that there was so many good answers. But Jalcott stood out. Take a listen. I'm a psychiatric nurse, and early on in my career, I worked at a residential mental health facility. One of our residents was an elective mute, which means that he didn't talk, but there was no medical reasoning as to why. He had spoken earlier in his life, and in fact seemed quite normal back then, with the exception of being close to 7 feet tall. He'd been raised in the deep south and joined the army when he was 19, but one night he vanished. He was declared AWOL, and eventually he was declared missing, and later officially declared dead. However, 10 years later, a 7-foot tall man walked into a Virginia hospital ER in my part of the Midwest and said to the receptionist, "My name is Marion Deschênes, and I've been dead for 10 years. And according to the Redditor, those were the last words he ever spoke to anyone. He had shown up to the hospital covered in dust and wearing an old uniform that he'd been wearing the night he vanished. His social security had not been used at all, and he had no ID on him whatsoever. However, via fingerprints, they were able to identify him. The family was notified, but they said they had already grieved their lost man and that whoever was claiming to be him simply wasn't, and asked to never be contacted again." The nurse went on to add that Marion would pace all day, every day, moving his mouth in a way that looked like he was muttering to himself, but nothing came out when he moved his lips. He had an unnerving habit of throwing his head back with his mouth wide open as if he was laughing hysterically, but not so much as a breath could ever be heard. The nurse said she tried talking to him almost daily, and he would appear to listen, but only react by periodically throwing his head back in that laughter-mimicking way of his. Various medications and treatment plans were pursued, but nothing ever affected him. Therapy was tried as well, but all that would happen was Marion would just grin and start pacing again. She goes on to say that on her last day, she saw Marion pacing in the parking lot, throwing back his head to laugh. She closes by saying all those years she'd wondered, was he a ghost? And all those years later, she still doesn't know. Click through and listen to as many top 5 scary videos as your ears can handle. Moving on. Number 4, things that go bunk in the night. Now you would never ever believe this, but our next story comes from Reddit as well. A similar thread, a similar question. What's the most paranormal thing you've ever experienced? Lots of good ones to pick from, but this one from Mad Rampager really stood out for me. I used to be in the military. The training camp bunk that we lived in was said to be haunted. Occasionally, our stuff would go missing and reappear in weird places, like under our bed or inside a bag that we'd zipped up and stuff. No big deal, right? Weird things happen, and I mean human error and all that. Well, then came the instance that freaked everybody out. It was night after lights out, and my friend was on his phone texting his girlfriend. Most of us had been drifting off to sleep and we were lying on our beds when suddenly my friend heard the shuffling of feet from the corridor. So, thinking that it was our sergeant, he quickly hid his phone under his pillow, rolled over on his side, and tried to get to sleep. What happened next still chills me to the bone to this day. While he pretended to sleep, he heard someone right behind him at the other end of the bed saying, "Don't worry, you can continue to pretend to sleep." I could have dismissed this as a figment of his imagination, except me and 5 other people around him heard it. Creepier still, there was no one there. And weirdly, it sounded like the voice of a young girl that had said it. For reference, our camp was in the middle of an island and was set up away from the main admin building. The island had been closed by the government for army training purposes for the past 15 years, so there were definitely no civilians around, let alone any children. To make matters freakier, when we came back from our weekend home leave, there was a bunch of hair on his bed, neatly bundled up, long and jet black, and underneath his pillow was a note. Remember me? Now, as I said, we're in the middle of a forest, in the middle of an island, and at that point in time, there were no female recruits whatsoever on the island. Our bunks were locked for the weekend, and the duty sergeant had no idea what had happened. We never spoke about it again after that night, and it still chills me every time I think about it.
In at 3, r/scared shitless. This subreddit is exactly what you would expect. Scary visuals and stories to scare the complete and utter shit out of you. Wonderful. Now, it does mostly contain GIFs and videos, but here's one post that caught my attention. I quote, "I got a text from a number that I didn't recognize that said, 'haha,' along with a link. I clicked the link, it opened in Safari and prompted me to use my current location. I allowed, Page was blank. 2 hours later I saw lightning or something from outside. Turned, nothing. Didn't really think about it. Kinda put 2 and 2 together the next day. I went back to that website. It was now a picture of the back of my head watching TV with a flash reflection in the middle. I went back to the text, but it was gone. Deleted. The most recent picture taken on my phone was a video, though taken after 3 AM. I was long asleep. My bill online confirms a rich media text was sent to that number I didn't recognize at the time. The video is a walkthrough of my house, showing the front door, sliding back door, and big windows, including a close-up on the lock of the biggest window. My house key was missing off the keychain when I looked later. My shit is freaked. This is absolutely terrifying. So essentially this guy shared his location with a stranger who then came to his house, took pictures of him before breaking in and filming him on his own phone. No, thank you. Never share your location. In it too, r/no sleep. Similar to our last number, this subreddit focuses on fictional and non-fiction stories that will keep you up at night. Now, there are your typical ghostly encounters and messages from beyond the grave, but this one really stuck out for me. It's a long one, so bear with me. I quote, "I recently went through a pretty nasty divorce, but I got the only thing that mattered out of it, full custody of my 4-year-old son. Lost everything else in the process, so we had to relocate to a new house with barely any luggage or furniture. Truly a fresh new start. I heard him call for me during our first night at our new home. It was a little after midnight, I think. I went to check on him to see what was wrong and sat by his bedside. He was wide awake and asked me to check the closet for monsters, which wasn't surprising given the circumstances. He's still just a little kid, and without even taking into account all the crap he's been put through thanks to my shitty marriage, moving into an unfamiliar, barely finished home must be a lot to take in for someone his age. And you know how they say that your brain always stays half awake when you're sleeping in a new environment, right? That's all pretty much what went through my mind in a flash as soon as my son spoke. It was no big deal, it was all normal. But something else almost immediately clicked inside my brain before I even got to look at where my son had pointed to while he made his innocent request. Something was wrong. I turned my head and looked, and it took everything I had in me not to give in to fear and terror, all for the sake of my son. When you become a parent, you have to protect your children no matter what, always putting yourself in harm's way if necessary, and spare them any and all kinds of things that might hurt them. That's why I didn't freak out. I couldn't, not when we had barely just started our new life. I had to protect him, and at that point in time, as I sat on his bed, I only knew one thing. We had to leave the room. We had to leave the house immediately. "Alright champ, of course," I said, faking bravery. Then I made a request of my own. As I lowered my voice and got closer to him, "Hey, how about you step outside for a minute? There's a monster in there, I'll have to kick its butt all over your room." He chuckled and said, "Okay." I made sure to put some extra emphasis on the word but, because it's something that always cracks him up when I say it. Fortunately, he got stuck on that, and not the fact that I was indirectly admitting to the possibility of there actually being a monster. As soon as he left the room, my mind raced as it started to put together the best and most efficient route to take him out of the house while picking up my car keys and phone on our way out. When I heard the closet door slowly creaking open behind me, I knew it was time to go. I jumped out of the bed, exited the room, and grabbed my son. We were out the door and inside the car and moving in under a minute. I told him I couldn't sleep, so we were going out for some ice cream to celebrate. He was a little taken aback and asked what we were celebrating, to which I replied, "Just us two together. I love you, buddy." It was by no means a lie, but I just had to make sure that he was alright and wouldn't think of anything else as we literally fled our new house. As I mentioned earlier, the house was a new environment for the two of us. I'd been there a couple of times before, cleaned it all up myself, and assembled what little furniture we had, so I knew for a fact what belonged where and what didn't. And I know his room didn't have a closet. Whoa, whoa, whoa. I was not expecting that ending. Truly terrifying. What I really want to know is where the closet came from. Did someone install it before they moved in? Did a ghost put it there? Was the boy just seeing things? I need answers. And finally, in at number 1, r/let's not meet. Now, as you would expect, this subreddit contains terrifying encounters with strangers in life and on the internet. So as you can imagine, these are some pretty terrifying posts. This in particular stood out to me. I quote, "I was driving home from work at 2 AM. I'm a nurse and I live in a small city. The roads were totally deserted and it was a freezing night. I don't live far from work, maybe a couple of miles. I'm driving down a residential street around the corner from my house, and I see a man laying face down in the street. Now, remember, I'm a nurse. My first thought was, great, gotta help this guy up. I was coming off a long shift and falls happen all the time. As I slowed down the car, I suddenly realized what an idiot move that was. I'm a 100-pound woman and I don't carry any weapons. I thought I should do something to help the guy, so I called 911 as I drove past him and slowed to a stop at the end of the block. While I was stopped at the light, I explained to the dispatcher that there was a man in the road who might need assistance. All of a sudden, I hear a loud bang bang from the driver's side window. I screamed and looked over. A man was pounding on my window and jiggling the handle of my locked car. I looked in the rearview mirror and saw that there was no man lying in the street now. Still on the phone with 911, I screamed, "I'm so scared," to the dispatcher and floored it through the red light. I quickly told him what had happened, and even though I was right by my house, he told me to keep driving. After a few minutes I had calmed down and he told me to loop back around. I pulled over down the road from my house and stayed in the car. I didn't see the man anywhere, so I got off the phone with the dispatcher, who told me he was sending a police car to cruise the area. As I gathered up my things, I did a final scan of the area and I saw the man. He was walking with 2 other men. I hunched way down in the car until they were far down the road, then bolted him to my house. I don't know if he had ill intent, but it freaks me the hell out that he wasn't alone. Always lock your car doors and carry mace. End quote. Oh boy, no. So essentially this guy in the road was likely waiting for people to pull over to rob them, or worse. It's common knowledge that gangs will often attack cars at night, gathering in the middle of the road to trick them into getting out of the car. When in doubt, just call 911.
Kicking off at number 5, the recurring dream. And this story from Reddit user Just Another Gamer is a visceral and horrifying reminder that lingering in the deep recesses of the human mind are some truly perplexing chemical reactions that we can't even begin to comprehend. Have you ever had a recurring dream? Ever thought, what the hell is this all about? What does it mean? Wow, yeah, this person is still asking the same question. As the story goes, Just Another Gamer is an avid cave diver, and since about the age of 6, they explored the unknown caverns across Florida. When they were around 7 or 8 years old, they started to have a strange recurring dream. In the dream, they were exploring a cave and made their way through a little hole in the bottom. Inside was a 10 to 15 foot long corridor a few feet in height and a bent red stop sign at the end, like someone had ripped it off and tossed it inside. As they'd make their way through the corridor, it started descending, quickly opening into a large vertical chamber with a path leading down in a corkscrew pattern. Then things would get blurry, but they'd remember the image of trash scattered around the walls, things writhing in the distance, strange things, animals and corpses maybe. Amidst them, they'd see their own family, each one of them being tortured and killed, but in the dream, all they could do was scream. Our narrator had this dream for years and years, always the same thing, until 7 or 8 years later, when they were around 15, they went on a caving trip with their father, a place called Dog Drop out in the Tampa Bay area. While when they were descending on a 30-foot rappel, they felt a strange, familiar feeling. When they reached the bottom and looked up, they saw the exact same corridor from their dream. The same strange clutters of trash against the wall, the same red stop sign. Instantly, they were hit with this overwhelming sense of nausea and primal fear, and they froze. All they could do is scream to leave, and eventually their father paid attention to them and packed up their things to leave. Whatever was lurking down there, our narrator knew that it wasn't good. They'd seen it before, deep in the recesses of their own memory, and thankfully they never found out. Coming in at number 4, the boat mechanic. And this short and sweet story comes from 2 Otters in a Coat, which is a fantastic name, may I add, telling the real life tale about a guy that they knew who made their living working as a boat mechanic. Now, random acts of violence are a different kind of fear, but this one takes it to a whole new level. As the story goes, one Saturday their friend, the boat mechanic, was working alone in their workshop, making some final repairs to a boat that had been brought in. Suddenly, out of nowhere, the mechanic wakes up and he's on the ground. Now, he knew that there was water beneath him just before he's working on a boat, so he assumed that he'd been electrocuted and the shock had knocked him away unconsciously. The strangest part is that he could vaguely sense someone behind him, so he started yelling for help, letting them know that he'd been electrocuted. Whoever was behind him turned and left without a word. He keeps screaming for help until eventually a neighbouring business heard his pleas and came to his aid. Later on though, once he'd been seen by the nearby hospital, he discovered from the police that he wasn't electrocuted at all. According to the police, someone had entered his workshop while he was working and hit him on the back of the head with a mallet from his own toolbox, and nothing was stolen from the shop. Now, this person was never caught and CCTV wasn't clear enough to identify the perp, but as it seems they were walking by and spontaneously decided to knock him out, potentially with the intention of killing him, for seemingly no reason whatsoever. Now that's terrifying.
Number 3, old friends. Our next story is from a Reddit thread asking, what's your ghost story? And I gotta point this one out just because it was too funny, but the original poster included the title in brackets, "Serious?" to deter any would-be paranormal pranksters. Just serious ghost stories, please. Luckily, Redditors obliged. User Barbed Cats shared this terrifying tale. When I was 37, I went to my high school reunion. I flew into the nearest airport and rented a car. The distance was about 35 miles through a very rural and almost abandoned part of the country. About 3 miles outside of town, I see someone on the side of the road flagging me down. Up in the North Woods, no one ever leaves someone else stranded, and it would turn out that the guy standing there was somebody I'd actually been to school with, my old friend Jim. Jim gets in the car and we start talking, catching up. I hadn't seen him in 20 years, but he still looked the same, maybe just a little bit older. We get to town and I ask him if he wants to come to the reunion with me and have a drink. He says no, just take me back home. Jim's parents had lived only a few blocks from my grandmother's, and I turned in that direction, but he said to take him to the part of town that really was just the outskirts, up by the fairground and the cemetery. There was a mobile home park out there, and I figured that must be where he lived. When we reached the end of the turn, he said, "Just drop me off here. It was nice to see you again," and he walked off into the night. So I went to the high school reunion, met up with some old classmates, and we start to talk. Now please understand me here. I am stone cold sober, nor do I ever take anything harder than soda. Tired after a 13-hour flight, but I was completely sober. As we were talking about who was showing up and who wasn't, I mentioned to my old classmate that I just picked Jim up a few miles off east of town and had dropped him up by the fairgrounds. Now for some reason everyone got really quiet. Even the guy belting out karaoke stopped, and my cousin went white as a shirt. Barb. Jim died 8 years ago. Rolled his car. I start to feel really dizzy, and I go out to the car to take some deep breaths and decide whether or not I'm going crazy. And there on the seat was a newspaper printed 8 years ago containing Jim's obituary. I still have that damn paper. Every now and again, I take it out to stare at it, and I still wonder just what the hell happened that night. Number 2, Ghost on the Line. The next story comes to us from a thread asking law enforcement officers of Reddit what is the creepiest call that you've ever been on. We get a very creepy answer from user Smokey Bonaparte sharing this creepy little tale. The Redditor writes, 911 dispatcher calling in. We received a call from an elderly lady who had trouble breathing. I had taken several calls from her before and her husband in the past, so I recognized the voice. I dispatched an ambulance to her residence and held her on the line trying to keep her calm while the ambulance was responding. Ambulances advised that they had a 15-minute ETA as she was in a very rural part of West Virginia. I'm talking to her just about her husband and how she was doing and just making pretty standard small talk with her. The ambulance arrives and I let them know that she is in severe respiratory distress and I still had her on the line. I let her know the ambulance is coming to her door to go answer the door and she says okay and hangs up the phone. Oh, that's pretty normal, right? Well, here's where it gets very weird. The EMT and paramedic on scene call back about a minute after, and they say that no one is answering the door. We have a sheriff in the area pulling on scene about that time. The sheriff unit confirmed the address and he's breaching the door to make access to the PT. 5 minutes go by and the paramedic on scene radios to ask me who called. I tell them it was the elderly woman who lived on residence. He tells me he's going to call this in and he needs to speak with my shift supervisor. We get him over to the supervisor and the supervisor confirms the same information I relayed, that it was all correct, and asks what's going on. Apparently the old woman had been dead for a while and was already in full rigor mortis. They thought I was wrong on the caller, but the other dispatchers played it back for them and confirmed it was the old woman who called. The ambulance transferred the hospital and we got the same calls and disbelief from the doctors. But I took a call from a ghost that day. Number 1, uninvited guest. Closing off our list is this story which chilled my spine like Sub-Zero. Coming to us from user Parole Model, which hey, by the way, love the pun. It was from an Ask Reddit thread asking, what's the creepiest thing that's ever happened to you? Lots and lots and lots of good ones, but this one took the cake. So lend an ear. I used to visit my friend at her house out in a rural farming area before she moved. I'd sleep over a lot and we'd just hang out and draw. I usually slept in the living room and on the couch, and there were 2 mirrors in the room that were fairly close to the TV. When the TV was off and I was walking by, I started seeing shadows move behind me. I thought it might just be something off the TV screen, and then one evening I walked into the living room to get my sketchbook so I could sketch in her bedroom. I bent over and picked it up, stood up straight, and I looked in the mirror and saw a man behind me. A man standing in the hallway leading to the living room. He was average height, bald, and a bit old. I turned to look at him and no one was there. I turned to look at the mirror again and he was gone. I felt more than a little spooked. Another time, we were just sitting in the living room and we heard what sounded like a kid's footsteps running across upstairs quickly. She had 2 adult siblings, but they were out at work leaving us all alone. Around that time, I decided to sleep in my friend's room instead of the living room, only to wake up in the middle of the night to see 4 posters slowly get peeled off the wall. No, it wasn't just them falling and dragging each other down. It looked as if someone was carefully unsticking the tape and removing them. The next morning, my friend put them back up saying, "Well, I need to get some better tape." She and her family eventually moved out because they couldn't afford to keep living there anymore. We'd never really talked about anything that had happened in that house, as if talking about it might actually make it worse. But after she moved, I finally confronted her and said it. I said, "Dude, your house was haunted. I hope you knew that." She replied, "Yeah, we knew it was. Some guy and his granddaughter used to live there, but he took her life and then took his own. So it was probably them or something. I never told you because I didn't want to scare you." Later, she would dig out a copy of a news article she got from a local paper about the crime. The picture that went with the article was the exact man I saw all those years ago.
Kicking us off at number 5, we've got r/no sleep. If creepy stories are your jam, then this is the place to start. Creepypasta fans flock to this subreddit to read and write the next generation of scary online stories. As one of the better known freaky subreddits, No Sleep has over 1.4 million subs. After opening its doors about 10 years ago, it's become the premier destination for creatives and spook seekers alike. As the name implies, it's the classic read till 4 AM and then realize it's totally dark and you can't move site. If you want to fall down a rabbit hole of scary stories, this is the place to do it. You read one, and then another, and you keep going until your brain is 100% composed of scary internet stories. This, contrary to popular belief, is actually healthy. What makes No Sleep a special place for campfire story enthusiasts is the set of rules that make it a wonderful community. It's easy to dampen enthusiasm and discourage active posting if everyone's already crapping all over what's being written. So to keep the "this is so fake" crowd at bay, they have an overarching rule. Everything here is true, even if it's not. This makes for more fruitful discussion, keeps ideas flowing, and allows for more creative collaboration. No Sleep is full of well-known online horror gems like The Limping Woman, Search and Rescue, Mimicry, and more. Enjoy your insomnia. Coming in at number 4, we got r/paranormal. Now, if you've decided that fiction posing as reality isn't quite your speed, you can take a trip to the wild world of the paranormal. Investigators and enthusiasts alike gather here to swap tales of spectral encounters and really dig deep into the stories that others are telling. Unlike on No Sleep, skeptics and the totally reality-centric are encouraged to get to the bottom of each post. Nothing is off limits as long as it's relevant and paranormal related. Here, exorcisms and cursed objects are discussed with photos, videos, and written accounts to back them up. Recently, we talked about a cursed statue that first gained notoriety on r/paranormal, which is a primetime example of the kind of stuff to expect. Ghosts, ghouls, curses, cryptids, you name it. If it doesn't fit into the well-established version of reality that most folks subscribe to, you'll likely find it here. Connections between amateurs and experts are made here too. Folks experiencing their first real scare can come to seek advice on how to deal with it, or potentially on how to resolve any number of freaky happenings. And it's not all problems and solutions though. Some topics brought up on this board are actually unexplainable though, compounding the mystery and creep factor. Videos of objects moving when they really shouldn't, threads of crime scene cleanness experiences, unexplainable security footage, and more await. A very popular, very unnerving category of posts is things kids said. You know, children with knowledge of things that they really can't explain. Past lives, ghost sightings, and more. That's the last thing anyone wants to hear. Portents of doom from innocent youngsters. Hopefully they're not possessed.
Next up at number 3, The Closet. This story comes from Tighty Whitey's 37, which is, yeah. As the story goes, back in 2002, they were living in an old apartment that had been built back in the year 1900, making it just over 100 years old when they moved in. Now, everything in the apartment was great apart from one thing. The bedroom, and in particular the closet in the bedroom, which gave them the unnerving feeling that someone or something was watching them when it was left ajar. So much so that when this particular Reddit user was sleeping, they'd often hear strange gasping noises, and it would seem that they were coming from within the closet. They'd check, nothing there. But for that reason, the closet would always stay closed. A month or so of them staying in the apartment, there was a loud bang on the closet door one night, and our narrator was woken from their sleep. It was pitch black, yet they sensed something that emerged from the closet, standing over them, a pressure holding them down in their bed. And yeah, you could explain this away with sleep paralysis, but the end of this story may just make you think twice. Throughout their stay at the apartment, the encroaching sense of dread from the closet had never quite left, and even their friends would comment on the strange feeling that they felt when in the vicinity of the closet. It got so bad that eventually they had the chance to move to another unit, so they jumped at the opportunity, packed their stuff up, and got the hell out of there. Well, a few years later, the owners were renovating the building when a narrator was walking past the doorway of their old apartment. Curiously, they caught the building manager, who was painting in the bedroom, and began talking about the strange feeling that they felt whilst living there. Without thinking twice, the building owner explained that the former tenant of the apartment had committed suicide. They'd hanged themselves in the closet. And not only that, but the original designer of the building, who had also stayed in the same apartment, had also committed suicide. They'd hanged themselves in the exact same closet. Swinging in at number 2, the baby upstairs. And this story comes from Reddit user UrgeHouse666, spooky name bud, who explains an incredibly strange moment during their teenage years. As the tale goes, when they were in high school, their uncle would throw them a couple of bucks every now and then to babysit his kids with their aunt. But they lived in a beautiful old 2-story house by the water in a nice area, and the 2 children were around 3 and 6. One day, our narrator was sitting in the den scrolling through their phone when they started to hear a baby crying. Of course, it must be the 3-year-old distressed upstairs, so doing their babysitting duty, they headed to check on them. They called out a couple of times while heading upstairs, to no response. They called for their aunt to see if she was dealing with it. No response again. When they turned to start walking up the stairs, they caught a glimpse outside in the yard. It was their aunt with her 2 children laughing and playing on the grass. They heard the babies cry again, the noise coming from upstairs, and all of the hairs on our narrator's body stood on end, a chill running down their spine. Quietly, they turned around, walked down the stairs, got in their car and drove away. The baby was still crying when they closed the door behind them. A few years later, our narrator was drunk at a family party, and they mustered the courage to tell their uncle the story. He said that him and his wife used to hear the baby too, crying when no one else was around. According to him, the previous owners had a small child that had died of cot death in the same room that the cries were coming from. Spooky stuff. And finally, coming in at our number 1 spot, the attic. And again, another tale of spooky kids in upstairs locations. Sorry, I hope that wasn't a spoiler. This story comes from Reddit user Ghouls, who tells the tale of the time that they'd moved into their new childhood home. You see, their family had managed to snag a deal because previously the house was used as a model home to show off the housing design of the surrounding area. Upstairs, it had this loft area that had 2 stairwells that attached to it on either end, one in the front and one in the back. You could pretty much hear everything from up there as it was so open. Anyway, one day our narrator and their 2 friends, a guy and a girl, were hanging out in the loft. It was high school, so teenagers being teenagers, the pair were pretty handsy. They were watching TV all snuggled together on the sofa when our narrator got up to take a leak. When they got back, the 2 of them were on completely different ends of the couch, their faces drained of all colour. Our narrator asked them what was up, and the guy said, "Your little sister is home." Instantly, our narrator's face went white as a sheet. "What's wrong?" the girl asked. You see, our narrator didn't have a little sister, and he asked them what made them think he did. They replied that they'd heard her and then they'd seen her, but for all they knew, no one was in the house. To this day, our narrator's 2 best friends swear that they heard a little girl laugh and run up the stairs, hitting her hand on each step like she was running up on all 4s, like kids do. As it turned out, before it was a model home, a family had lived there, and their young daughter had been playing upstairs in the loft. She'd climbed a railing, slipped and fell to her death, and no one thought to mention that fact when they were flipping the house. No wonder they got such a good deal.
In at 5, r/paranormal. I mean, it's right there in the title, paranormal. And honestly, what's more scarier than that? This subreddit contains some people's most terrifying and unexplainable encounters with the paranormal, ranging from deceased relatives to demons. A notable post from the subreddit reads as follows, I quote, "I live on the coast of South Carolina and my backyard is directly on the marsh. I woke up and went downstairs to use the bathroom. Kept having this weird nagging feeling like I was forgetting something or something was off. So I went to find my mother. She's a night owl and stays up super late doing gardening stuff, and she likes to feed the raccoons. I went to the backyard and saw her about 100 yards from the back door facing the marsh. I called out to her, but she didn't hear me, so I started to walk out to her. Once I started getting closer, she turned to face me with a completely blank expression. So I asked her what was wrong. I was about 12 feet away from her and she turned back towards the marsh. Then the fucking back door opened and I turned to see my mum standing on the deck, and she called out to me, asking what I'm doing. I've never run so fast in my life, but I looked back to the marsh and could see that thing disappearing. It looked just like my mum. I yelled at my mum to go inside and that there was something out there. I told her what I saw and I've been crying and shaking. We woke up my husband and my dad and they think I must have still been asleep. I can't stop shaking. What the f just happened? Am I crazy? Did something try to lure me out to the marsh? I must be losing my damn mind. But I know what I saw. Wow, creepy stuff. To me it sounds like she might have just been sleepwalking and awoke after her mum yelled after her, but what do you think? Is there a shape-shifting entity lurking the marshes in South Carolina, hunting for its next victim? In at 4, r/glitch in the matrix. Glitch in the matrix is most people's preferred term to use when they get deja vu. It essentially means that something has sparked a memory in your mind, making you feel like you've already experienced whatever it is you are experiencing, that something you're doing feels like it has already happened to you. It's simple. Now, some people over on r/glitch in the matrix have documented some of their most frightening cases of deja vu. One of the scariest ones that I read goes as follows. I quote, "This has been playing on my mind for years now. I had a very realistic dream about a friend of mine when we were both 19. In that dream, he died. We were sitting against a brick wall talking and he was telling me that sometimes our time is up and to make the most of it, and some other advice. I woke up the next morning and was freaked out, so I called him and told him about it. He laughed and said, that would suck, but reassured me that he was fine and not going anywhere. 2 days later I had a call from his parents to say he had suddenly died in his sleep. The last time I spoke to him was when I called him after my dream." End quote. Creepy stuff. Now, this one feels more like a premonition to me, or just a really spooky coincidence rather than a glitch in the matrix, but still it's terrifying to say the least.
Coming in at number 3, we've got r/unresolved mysteries. So less mystical and more mystery this time. This subreddit is dedicated to all sorts of unsolved disappearances, unexplainable crimes, unbelievable happenings, etc. If you've ever watched a true crime documentary with a bunch of loose ends, or read up on the many cold cases that are out there getting colder by the day, you'll know what this is all about. People leaving home and never coming back after being sighted outside a sketchy gas station. Families going on vacation and remaining away. Updates on famous criminals who have never been caught, the whole shebang. And while a great deal of mysteries involve missing people and conspiracies related to the functioning of well-moneyed celebrities, there are also some mysteries that are just plain strange. Prisoners who refuse to disclose their identity to anyone, remaining 100% anonymous. Investigations into the glitter industry, trying to figure out why Corbin Blue's Wikipedia page is so well translated compared to other more bankable stars. A thread of Redditors who vanished after asking questions that may have hit a little too close to home. That last one is particularly worrisome, especially if you're interested in stuff like this. Speculation is encouraged and folks should be ready to bring in evidence and research if they want to push their narrative. It's stuff like this that opens up whole worlds that you may have never known about, and maybe after falling down the rabbit hole, wish you avoided. I think the scariest thing about unresolved mysteries, though, is the large number of amateur podcasts it inspires. Coming in at number 2, we've got r/let's not meet. Have you ever read the missed connections section of any publication? How many of those do you think ended well? And how many were posted by a creepy guy who thought he was getting somewhere before whoever he was pursuing ditched? Sometimes you might get a ghost world scenario, but how well did that work out for everyone? Not great. r/let's not meet is based on the concept of another similar subreddit called r/let's meet. Basically a giant online classified ad board where folks who are really into an interaction with an individual can try their hand at meeting a second time. Sometimes it's cute, sometimes it's desperate, and often it can get a little weird. The weirdest of the weird might make the leap into the dark side and end up on Let's Not Meet. This is the place to post tales of your creepiest real-life encounters with other people. Let's face it, people are weird and bad. Not always, but everyone's got a story about a person they hope they never see again. Whether it's a bad time at a party or a first date gone terribly wrong, the world is full of freaks and creeps who don't seem to understand how socialization works. Stalkers, peeping toms, and overly aggressive barflies all find their homes here. And what makes it extra disturbing is the fact that people are told not to exaggerate. This is not a place to hone your story writing craft. Instead, it's a place to recount actual events as they happened, which, when you think about it, is much creepier than any scary story. Some of the most haunting stories involve people coming within inches of death. I've seen more than one post about someone being somewhere moments before disaster, running into killers moments before they take down their victim, seeing kidnappers and sexual predators scoping out targets, human traffickers canvassing for their next score. It's terrifying to consider how close we may all be to disaster when out and about. and the tales from Let's Not Meet are a chilling reminder. And finally, at number 1, we've got r/50/50. Heaven or hell, what's it gonna be? 50/50 is basically a long list of high-stakes coin flips. Guess correctly and you're no worse off. Guess wrong and you could be psychologically scarred forever. You're risking your sanity for fun. Each post presents you with 2 options, something nice and harmless, or something NSFW or NSFL. I didn't even realize there were tags for things not safe for life. Thank goodness though. Because some of the options on 50/50 are so gross, so repulsive, that seeing them could cause permanent damage to a person's psyche. Secondary trauma is real, and if you're not ready, you could be having nightmares for years. Risking it all and running through a few of the posts became a popular pastime and even launched some content creators into the spotlight. Infamy is just as good as fame, right? Let's just take a look at some of the options you have while browsing 50/50, and you let me know whether you'd be willing to take that bet. Men getting eaten alive by shark versus men dancing with shark. A beautiful neighborhood versus man gets electrocuted until his head falls off the side of the roof. A Bob Ross painting versus a decomposing corpse. Wizard spider with his magic hat and mighty staff versus horribly infected spider bite. Honestly, the risk versus reward factor isn't enough for me. I feel like the only reward is the relief of not being exposed to something disturbing, but hey, some people live for the thrill, right?